Hello, and welcome to another episode of In the Trenches with Gang Green. I'm your host, Bubbs. Today is Wednesday, December 18th. Hopefully, everybody's having a good day so far today. This is episode 450 of the In the Trenches with Gang Green podcast. I thank you, as always, for joining me. For those tuning in on YouTube, make sure to please like and subscribe as we get closer to 500 subscribers. As always, appreciate you all who tune in on all the different audio podcast platforms. It's another day, another pod, and a lot of Jets news to break down in today's podcast. We're going to take a look at some of the latest general manager and head coaching reports here for the New York Jets that have come out over the last couple days. We'll also take a look at some news on Garrett Wilson, a potential trade request from Rich Cimini's Flight Deck podcast earlier today. And we'll also get into some comments made by Aaron Rodgers when he spoke to the media earlier this afternoon after practice. As always, though, before we get into any of that here on the podcast, let's get into our podcast partners, starting with our friends over at BetUS, America's favorite online sportsbook. If you're looking to get in on any of the betting action for the college football playoff, NBA, NHL, the rest of the NFL regular season heading into the playoffs, make sure to check out BetUS, college basketball as well, you name it. And at sign up, you click my link in the description of this video to get a 125% sign up bonus on your first 3 deposits up to $2,000, and go check out BetUS, where the games begin. Also, our friends over at SeatGeek. You're looking to get out to the Jet game this weekend. Are you a Rams fan looking to see the Rams in action out at MetLife Stadium? Use promo code BUBSONSPORTS for $20 off your first purchase at SeatGeek, and any sport, not just this weekend's game. You know the drill. Plays, concerts, shows, you name it, SeatGeek has it. And of course, if you're looking for a holiday gift, check out Huga House and their awesome selection of hats. Use promo code BUBS for 15% off your hat, and then the next half 30% off. So check them out and get yourself some awesome Huga House swag. So here we go, episode 450. Lots to get into today, and we've got a lot of recent news here coming out on the latest revolving the Jets and their general manager and, of course, head coaching searches as well. Just 3 games left, so things are beginning to heat up here. I'll start with I guess the oldest news of them all, and that was the Thomas Dimitroff interview, which we covered, on Monday in our second podcast of the day. There, we talked about the Jets interviewing Dimitroff. He was the first official interview for the Jets. We've talked about him a lot. Falcons GM from 2008 to 2020, has NFL experience dating all the way back to 1993. 13 seasons in Atlanta, saw him make the playoffs 6 times, 4 wins, made a Super Bowl. Unfortunately, that was the infamous 28-3 Super Bowl. But out of 113-95 records, 6 double-digit win seasons, 7 winning seasons total. 6 of those made the playoffs. The only one came in when they went 9-7 in 2009 and missed the playoffs. Obviously had a lot of success with some of his draft picks, Chris Lindstrom, A.J. Terrell, some of the more recent guys, as well as Calvin Ridley. And then, of course, Matt Ryan, who he selected in 2008. And then Julio Jones, who he gave up a haul for. But if you're going to give up a haul for a guy, you're going to want to give up a haul for a guy that's going to be with your team for a while and going to have success. And to say Julio Jones had a successful career is an understatement. He is going to one day end up in Canton as a gold jacket guy. So a lot's of good from Dimitroff. Just like all of these candidates, it wasn't a perfect resume. There was certainly some misses, especially on the defensive side of the football. Jet Tack McKinley was one of his misses. So it wasn't, a perfect 13 seasons, but he lasted over a decade. He made the playoffs a ton. He was very consistent, hit on the quarterback, hit on a lot of great talent, had a lot of success there. And I would certainly be open to him coming in as a general manager because, as I've said many times, he's got experience, and that's what this team needs. Experience at both general manager and head coach, because first-time guys are just going to eat eaten alive here. And it's not only just that, it's also just the culture that's in place. You need to bring in guys that know how to set a culture from day one. You can't bring in guys that are going to try and learn on the job while trying to set a culture, because that's where you end up in the situation we're in now, where 2-3 years from now, you've made zero headway, and we're talking about a new coach in 2026 again, 2027, and we're on this hamster wheel of just failure. So that's where Dimitrov stands. Talked about him on Monday. If you want some more extended thoughts on him, check out that video. Now, the two most recent reports that have come out, or even other reports that we haven't necessarily talked about. Now, the John Robinson and Louis Riddick report came out over the weekend. However, the Jets yesterday completed an interview with John Robinson, former general manager for the Tennessee Titans. He spent 6.5 seasons with Tennessee. He got fired midway through his final season there, which was the 2022 season. Went 66-48 overall. He hired Vrabel in 2018, so does have the connection with Vrabel. 4 playoff appearances, 1 conference appearance, a total of a 3-4 record in the playoffs. Never had a losing season, because when he got fired in 2022, while the team finished 7-10, when they fired him, they were 7-5. They went on to lose their final 5 in a row, fell to 7-10. Now, the John Robinson thing, again, we hear the report from ESPN. He ended up getting an interview. So I do like the part of the Jets early on here in this interview cycle that they are hiring guys or looking into guys that already have experience and already have a good, solid resume of experience. It's not like, John Robinson and Dimitrov went to some crappy team, was the GM there for 2 years, got ran out of town, and then they're looking into him. No, these are guys that built teams that were able to get to the playoffs, go deep into the playoffs. Dimitrov got a team, 30 minutes away from a Super Bowl, which they completely blew, as we all know. Not that that was his fault, more so coaching in that game, as we all know. We don't need to rehash the 28-3 game. Everybody in America, even if you're not a football fan, knows what took place that night. But John Robinson is a guy, of course, another guy with experience. He had 6 full seasons there. All were winning seasons. He had 2 double-digit win seasons back-to-back in 2020 and 2021. And then in 2019 came that conference title appearance. So for 3 years, that was a Titans team that was one of the better teams in the NFL. Never had a losing season. Now, what ultimately led to John Robinson, and I think this will kind of tie into where we head to here soon with the whole Mike Vrabel stuff. The whole John Robinson and Mike Vrabel connection is kind of a little weird, because Robinson, of course, took over in 2016. He hired Vrabel in 2018 after his first 2 seasons. Now, he got Derrick Henry. He got A.J. Brown, 2 excellent draft picks that set that team up for success for those kind of that 4-year stretch that they had, or that 3-year stretch, I should say, that they had, where they had 2 double-digit win seasons. They had the conference title game appearance, all that good stuff, where they were winning consistently and one of the better teams in football. When he traded A.J. Brown, which ultimately kind of led to his firing, there's been many reports. There's kind of been mixed reporting on. There's been some people that say, they don't like. There's been some reports that they have a disconnect, and there's also been some reports that haven't really talked too much about it, that they more so just have the connection there. But there has been some reports that John Robinson, after he traded A.J. Brown, one of their best assets, him and Vrabel kind of had a disconnect after that point, because they traded A.J. Brown for nothing, and it significantly hurt the team, not only then, but also in the future, even after John Robinson left, where last year in 2023, Vrabel went out with a losing season. The team was completely, the town started to drop off, right? You lost A.J. Brown. Derrick Henry ended up leaving at the end of the year anyway. But you kind of heard that there might have been a disconnect after that move was made. So it'll be interesting to see. And I wonder if this is even brought up too in the interview process. Like, where does their relationship stand? Because it doesn't seem like it's great, but then you also hear things that maybe it's not terrible, that if they do hire John Robinson, it doesn't completely take him out of the whole Vrabel sweepstakes. But that's definitely something to look for. I would take Mike Vrabel over John Robinson. So if you're telling me if we hire John Robinson, we're not going to get Vrabel, I would take my chances with hiring a Dimitrov or somebody like that, which then keeps the door open for Vrabel. But who knows? Maybe the two would be open to working again together, get over the whole A.J. Brown thing, work again together, and we'll see how that all plays out. But something to look for there with him and Vrabel. And again, another guy with experience. I want guys with experience. And I will continue to say this. There's so many people out there. And you know what was funny? This was the whole thing, too. It reminds me back in 2023. I remember coming on this podcast, back crazy already. It's going to be 2 years this March where, Rodgers went on his whole darkness retreat and all that stuff. It's crazy. It just shows you how much has gone on in this whole Rodgers tenure. That 2 years, it feels like a decade ago that it feels like a decade ago that Rodgers went on McAfee and said, I intend to play and I intend to play for the New York Jets. It feels like that between the torn Achilles, all the stuff that's happened this year, all the hype last season. Like we basically had a whole year and a half of hype, and just to have it enter into now a 4-10 team, like it just, this whole thing has felt like it's been 10 years long. And yet it was only 2 years ago since that day. But, the point that I'm bringing up here is the point that I'm bringing up when we were talking about Rodgers and the whole Rodgers, Derek Carr debate. We were all saying, and I said it many times, everybody was trying to find, everybody kept knocking Rodgers. Everybody kept knocking Derek Carr, finding holes in their game, finding problems that could occur if they came here, finding reasons why it wouldn't be a good move. And I said it all the time during that time, and I'll say it again. None of these guys are going to be perfect. That's why they don't have jobs. That's the reality. If you're available as a general manager, as a head coach, as a coordinator, as a player, for anything, for anything, even Bill Belichick, right? The way it ended in New England, and organizations no longer, similar to Atlanta, like Atlanta being the main one last year, didn't want to hand the keys over to him and have him have a full power. Like every person that's available that the Jets is interviewing is not going to be perfect. There's so many fans out there, and there's even so many NFL analysts out there critiquing every guy that the Jets hire. There's not going to be a perfect guy. That's what happens. These guys are available for a reason. Whether, they're available for a reason. They all are. Right? Everybody's going to have their knocks. Same thing with Vrabel. None of these guys are perfect. That's why they're out there. If they were perfect, they'd have jobs right now. So I just want to make that clear too. Everyone, because I've even seen it sometimes. I know there's probably a lot of you critiquing John Robinson and critiquing Dimitrov and all this stuff. And believe me, everybody's got their knocks. Everyone's got their problems, but that's why they're available. That's why. So it's just, I always find it funny how people's like, oh, well, this guy, then who the heck do you want? Everybody that the Jets are going to interview, everybody, and the ultimate guy that's ultimately going to get hired, and the general manager and head coach, they're going to be in place. Both of them, they're going to have weaknesses. That's what both of them are going to. That's why they're available. So you got to ultimately look for the perfect candidate, and in my eyes, the most experienced candidate. And two guys that have experience are Robinson and Dimitrov, and they start off the interviewing process, rather, with those two guys. Now, I prefer Dimitrov over Robinson. I think he's got a better resume. I also question Robinson's and Vrabel's relationship. And Vrabel's so high on my list that I'm not going to take a general manager over Vrabel. If that makes sense. Like if I had a choice between Robinson and Vrabel, I'm taking Vrabel. So the next candidate that we'll talk about, and this came out in an ESPN report as well over the weekend with John Robinson. Now, every report that's come out about the Jets interviewing guys has happened, right? Thomas Dimitrov been interviewed. John Robinson got interviewed yesterday. Louis Riddick is another name that came out about getting interviewed, and they said that he'll get interviewed at a later date. Now, again, a common theme with all these candidates is all these guys are out there right now. They're not currently with teams. So Dimitrov, right, has been out of the league since 2020. Robinson been out of the league since 2022. Louis Riddick's doing stuff on ESPN. So they can interview these guys right now because they're not with any team. In terms of once the regular season's over, teams that are, of course, eliminated, they have free range. Teams that are in the playoffs, there's certain rules and stuff. But that's a whole other thing in itself when the season ultimately ends. But the whole Louis Riddick thing, Louis Riddick, rather. I would be honest, I'm not as high on Louis Riddick as many others are, just because he has very little experience. Very, very little experience from a front office perspective. This is a guy that was with the Redskins from 2001 and 2007 in a variety of roles, but mainly as a scout. And it was with the Eagles from 2008 to 2013 for a variety of roles, but also mainly as a scout. So he spent from 2001 to 2013, in the NFC East, in the NFL for that stretch of time. However, he's been out of the league since. Now, he's been with ESPN here for a while as an analyst, as we all know. But since the last time he was part of an NFL organization, an NFL front office, was going all the way back to 2013. So it's been a while. So he's very inexperienced. Even his previous experience isn't a whole lot. It's not like he was ever really, an assistant GM, or he was always a scout. Now, that's one thing that always gets brought up, is he is a guy that has a very good eye for talent. And I know this, I'll try and word this the right way, but even if you've gone back and looked at some of the players that he has talked about and evaluated during his time at ESPN, he's hit on a lot of guys. There's been a lot of, when the draft cycle comes around and he's doing his draft coverage, there has been a lot of things that he has said while his time at ESPN that have come out to be true, just because his ability to scout and have an eye for talent. And to be fair, Louis Riddick is not like a guy that this is his first time ever being interviewed. In the past, he's been a name that have kind of popped up for a while. I can even probably make the case his name maybe even popped up the first go around when the Jets were looking for Douglas. His name's been around for a while. Over the last 4 or 5 years, it feels like every offseason his name gets kind of popped up in the rumor mill. So it feels like this is a guy that a job will be coming, and a job's been waiting for him for a long time. I just continue to say it, even as a guy with scouting experience, and it seems like he's got a really good eye for talent, which is good. Again, and a lot of people, he's well respected around the league. You hear a lot of people talk about him as kind of a no-nonsense guy, a really good football mind. We get all that, but the inexperience to me I'm maybe not on high as Riddick as some others. There's a lot of people out there that are very high on Riddick, feel like he could be the next big GM, kind of like the rising star. I don't know if I necessarily, I would lean more towards a guy with experience. Now, Riddick's not my least favorite guy, but I think where the Jets are, a guy with experience to me just would do better. So we'll see. But again, he's been in general manager conversations for a while. He'll get an interview. We'll see what happens. And ultimately, you've got to hope that you could trust this 33rd team leading the way, finding these names, similar to how it did in Washington, and hopefully you hit on the guy. And if Riddick is the guy, you hope that he's the general manager here for a very long time. I just don't know if it's really that smart to go with a guy like that as a first-time GM. Even like a Ray Agnew would be higher on my list as a first-time GM, just because he's currently in NFL front office. He's an assistant GM, so he's just, he's right there from that perspective. You see what what the Lions have done. Riddick, there would just be some questions as to can he really take it all on? And how would he work in this market as a first-time guy? So that's another name. Now, Mike Vrabel also brought up, and this is a big one. Vrabel, I've said it many times. He's my top guy. He is my top guy. He is, to me, if the Jets get Vrabel, that's like my home run hire. I've said it many times. I like Vrabel. Vrabel was my one. Outside of Vrabel, to me, the old Ricky Bobby saying, if you ain't first, you're last. That's kind of where I stand with the whole Jets coaching search. I don't really have necessarily a full-on top 5. To me, it's Vrabel and in a pretty sizable gap and in everybody else. you get into like your Flores. I like Flores. I would say it's Vrabel, Flores, like Vrabel, Gap, then Flores. And I like Todd Monken. And then outside of that, again, it's a kind of a short list. Like I like Gruden. I just don't see that happening. I would be open to Gruden. I know people are very hot, cold on Gruden. I'm probably maybe more open to Gruden than some. But then again, this is the guy that won a Super Bowl without running a single snap in shotgun. And you saw how it was going with the Raiders. It wasn't great in with Oakland and in Vegas, even prior to the whole email thing and the resignation and all that stuff. Wow, that year they ended up making the playoffs with Bisaccia afterwards, and they probably would have made it anyway with Gruden. Who knows what happens if he never gets the whole email stuff. But again, a guy that's suing the NFL, kind of awkward, I guess, how that all ends up playing out. So I like Gruden, but like he's in like a world kind of a league of his category of his own, just with everything going on. And I don't know. I have some questions. I mean, I don't like, I'm not totally anti Gruden, but he's not that high on my list. Like Kingsbury, I don't know. I don't love him. Like Ben Johnson a lot, but again, first time guy. If there would be a first time guy, I'd go after to be either Ben Johnson or Aaron Glenn. It's not going to be like a Bobby Slowick or somebody like that. You obviously got Liam Cohen, another name to look for from Tampa. But Vrabel's the top guy, bottom of the line. You know, the bottom line is Vrabel's the top guy, and multiple sources believe the Jets covet him the most, and that should be the case. He's the number one. He's the number one coach in this coaching cycle, with Belichick especially officially going to North Carolina. Like if Belichick was still available, it probably would have been Belichick. But now with him gone, Vrabel's the number one guy in this cycle in terms of like track record, everything he is. I think he's even higher than Ben Johnson. Now, especially for the Jets, right? Ben Johnson might fit more of a team like the Bears. For the Jets, they would need a guy like Vrabel. Culture guy, experienced. We talked about him a lot. 6 seasons in Tennessee, was 54-45, made the postseason. Obviously, 4 of his made the postseason, 2-3 overall, 1 conference title appearance. 4 of his 6 seasons had at least 9 wins, made the playoffs in 3 of those 6 seasons, and did it with average to slightly above average quarterback play. You know, he had Tannehill for a while there. Biggest thing with Vrabel would be hiring, you know, the correct offensive staff. And you look at what he did in Tennessee, he did a lot of times. His offensive coordinators panned out. Right? Matt LaFleur went to Green Bay, as we all know. Arthur Smith then went to the Falcons, which didn't quite work out as a head coach, but now he's back in Pittsburgh, and he has completely helped Russell Wilson kind of revive his career, you know, bring him back up from the dead. And then Todd Downing was the other name, but, you know, now he's the Jets OC. I mean, he's not going to be here next year. So Downing hasn't quite worked out, but you get the point. 2 of his 3 offensive coordinators panned out, so you could trust him to hire guys in the offensive staff. I like Vrabel a lot. I don't think we have to say much more, and I think it's positive to hear that the Jets covet him the most. That was according to Connor Rogers. Hopefully that's kind of a sign of this building's going all in. Go all in for a guy like him. Especially Woody. Like, this is the time. Go all in. Get your GM, get your coach, let them run the operation, and just step away and stop getting your nose into everything because you don't know a single thing about football and don't know a single thing about how to run an organization. You don't. And Vrabel and a good GM would be the perfect combo to come in here and get this thing back on track from a culture perspective, similar to what he was able to do in Tennessee. So there's the Vrabel stuff, general manager reports. Now, some other news today. Garrett Wilson, we've got some news on him. Now, it's nothing Garrett Wilson said, but earlier this afternoon, Rich Cimini, by the way, the Flight Deck podcast from Rich Cimini is an awesome listen. It really is. There's so many good nuggets in there, whether I think 2 weeks ago we got the nugget that Mike Vrabel was open to everybody, like even the Jets. And Mike Vrabel was, you know, people close to him believe that he will be open to any job. You know, because for a while now we've wondered if a guy like Vrabel's caliber would even want to come here. With everything that's gone on and the potential meddlesome owner and Woody Johnson, not the potential, we know he's meddlesome, but then you heard that report. We got that from the Flight Deck podcast. So there's a lot of good nuggets that you can get from that podcast. And today there was another nugget On the Garrett Wilson trade request, people are close to Wilson believe he might request a trade in the offseason. Here's the clip. We'll talk more about it on the other side.
Talk to people in Garrett Wilson's circle. They think, now I want to emphasize this is speculation on their part. They think he will ask for a trade after the season. Again, speculative by people who know him. We don't know that to be a fact, but it's certainly something.
So there is the report there from Cimini, or the clip there from Cimini. Now, a couple things that I have to take away from that. Number one, they think. Number two, speculation. None of this clip is Garrett Wilson telling people around him, I'm requesting a trade. None of this clip is Garrett Wilson saying himself, I'm requesting a trade. Garrett Wilson has never come out publicly and said, I'm going to request a trade, or you ever got that, not indication, but ever got that feeling that he was like telling people, I'm going to request a trade, I'm getting out of here at the end of this season. So it's a lot of speculation, but it's something that does catch your eye because it's your star receiver. That's a cornerstone piece, a blue chip piece, an elite player at his position that is clearly unhappy. Now, Garrett Wilson, is he happy right now? No. Is he unhappy to the fact where he will request a trade? Only time will tell. But look, clearly people around him are, get that feeling. Again, I don't know. I'm not going to put so much stock into this that it's like he's 100% going to request a trade. But it is something to obviously keep your eye on here as we head into the offseason and the rest of the regular season here. Final 3 games move forward here and ultimately conclude. I will say this about Garrett. While he's never openly come out and said, request a trade or stuff like that, there was 2 comments that I've always said have kind of just show you where the Jets are as an organization and where the culture is, right? Garrett last year after 2023 said, quote, it was the worst year of my life. Then you heard Breece Hall this year say, quote, the most trying year of my life. So all of these young guys are frustrated. All of these young guys, not just Garrett, aren't going to want to be here long term if they don't get this coaching hire right, if they can't figure out the quarterback, beyond Rodgers, and even just beyond not even just next season, wherever they go with that. So, that's the one thing is there is clear frustration. You see him running wide open. He's talked about in his post-game press conference a lot about the frustration. It wouldn't ultimately surprise me if he ever requested a trade. But the thing is, the Jets have no reason to trade him, and they should never trade him. Garrett Wilson needs to be a Jet for life. We've seen this a lot of times with receivers. Ayuk's one of the most recent examples where a guy will request a trade to try and get paid, and then we'll get paid and everything will be all fine. But the Jets have a ton of control over Garrett. He's only in year 3. They've got him under contract for the next 2 years. Plus, you can technically franchise tag him. So you can make Garrett Wilson, the Jets in a way could have him for another 3 years without even having to pay him a dime. So now you should extend him. You should make him a Jet. This should be his first year. He's open for an extension. I've said it many times. I would be all over it this offseason is to extend him now. Extend him right now. Extend him before, next year, whatever. Extend him now. Get him at the right value and lock him up for long term. Lock him up and make him hopefully a Jet for life. But I've said this ultimately. That's what makes this coaching hire so important is a guy like Garrett Wilson, even guys like Breece, even guys like Sauce, when they see this coaching hire and they see this general manager hire, I think a lot of that is going to dictate how ultimately they view and feel about their future. If they hire some first-time guy, they're going to be like, you know what? We saw this with Saleh. We saw how this is going to go. But if they hire a proven guy like Abe Vrabel and he comes into that room day one and lays out his plan and makes it clear what he is going to do, then those guys can buy in, and that's where he can stay here long term, and it might be easier to negotiate an extension, and the possibility of this whole trade request doesn't happen. But I continue to say this. You cannot lose a player, the type of character, the person that Garrett Wilson is. You just can't. And if this guy were to ever request a trade, even if they never traded him, it would be awful because he's so talented and he deserves to win. He deserves to win. They need to get it right. They need to give him a reason to believe in this organization moving forward. You look at his numbers this year, 84 receptions, 933 yards, 6 touchdowns. He's tied for 8th in receptions, 12th in yards, 17th in touchdowns, tied for 17th in touchdowns. He's going to have another 1,000-yard season. He's been in the league for 3 years. He's going to have 3 straight 1,000-yard seasons. I mean, that's huge. Huge on so many levels. There's a lot of great receivers out there that didn't have 3 straight 1,000-yard seasons in their first 3 years. Plus, you look at Garrett, the quarterback play he's been given. Man, he's got to be here long term. So, again, I'm not totally alarmed by that. And the Jets ultimately have control over Garrett Wilson. If he does request a trade, they don't have to trade him. They've got him under contract here essentially for the next 2 years. And hopefully you can work out an extension. But it does show you that this hire is so important. Again, shows you that once again. They get it right. These guys believe there's a reason then to stay here. If they don't get it right and these guys don't believe right away, there's a reason for them to request a trade. So don't have that happen. Now, moving on from the Garrett Wilson stuff, I'll also touch on this here before we go. Aaron Rodgers today spoke to the media, and I'll play this clip first. Here was him once again talking about his future beyond 2024 and going into 2025.
The way you say you're feeling, and obviously the way you've been playing lately, does that make you think more or harder about next year?
No, not really. No,
Nothing's
still,
changed at this point?
no. I'm going to take some time after the year, unless I get released right away. But I'll still take some time whether or not I want to play. But I'll take some time to get away from it either way.
So there it is. Going to take some time, even if I'm released. Throwing that nugget out there. I don't think the Jets will just outright release Rodgers right when the year is over. I think we've said this many times. I'll say it again. It's ultimately got to come down to the general manager and the head coach. The general manager and head coach cannot be forced Rodgers on them. And ultimately, even if Rodgers wants to stay here, Rodgers, I guess, in a way, can't force himself on them. The Jets it's ultimately going to come down to GM, head coach. What do they want? Do they want Rodgers in 2025 and a rookie behind him? Do they want somebody else with less baggage instead that maybe can, potentially have a quarterback battle at camp? How does that all play out? So whatever the next head coach and general manager want, it's going to be. However, I will say this. Rodgers, again, I've said this many times, they've got to figure out, I know he wants to take some time off, but ideally you can get figured out whether or not he wants to play sooner rather than later, because a head coach and a GM, if they make their decision, you've got to figure out, okay, are you retiring? Do you want us to release you? Do you want us to trade you? Whatever. And then if a head coach and GM are open to it, you got to figure out if Rodgers is open to it as well. Does he like that head coach? Does he like that GM? Right? So that falls into it too. This can't be one of these things where mid-February we're still trying to figure out what the heck Aaron Rodgers is going to do. If he's in some darkness retreat once again, and we have no clue what he's going to do, no clue what his mindset's going to be coming out of it. Now, I think there's an old quote by Bill Parcells. If you think about retirement, then you're already retired. So Rodgers here, similar to 2 years ago, thinking about retirement, then you're already retired. That was an old quote. We'll see what happens. The Rodgers stuff's really going to be interesting. I'll say this. I think when the general manager and the head coach is hired, number one, their press conference, the first question that's going to be asked is, what are you going to do with Aaron Rodgers? And I can guarantee you the answer is probably going to be, we respect Aaron, whatever. We have a lot of things we need to work on. We have a lot of things we need to evaluate, whatever the case may be. Similar to when Saleh took over, they asked him about Sam, I remember, in the press conference, and he said something along the lines of, I remember prepping for him this past season. He's really good, but again, we're going to, look at all options and stuff like that. So that'll be the same thing here. They'll never say it publicly, but you'll start to hear the rumors creep out about whether or not Rodgers likes to hire, whether or not Rodgers wants to come back, or if the general manager and head coach want Rodgers to come back. You'll probably know that pretty soon. Now, here was Rodgers on potentially playing for the Jets in 2025 and taking another pay cut.
Aaron, when you first came to the Jets, you adjusted your contract and took less money to be here. Your contract's a little complicated with the bonus and just some of the caveats in there. Would that be something you were open to doing again, adjusting it, or a second pay cut or anything like that to return next year?
Yeah, I'm open to everything. That's nothing. I'm open to everything.
So there's Rodgers, open to everything. Now, this was a guy in 2023 took the largest pay cut in sports history before I believe Jalen Brunson ended up taking his pay cut, which popped Rodgers'. A pay cut would make it a little bit more desirable, I guess, to bring him back just because of where his contract stands, especially the hit in 2026 that the Jets would take here. So that definitely would be something to look for. Who knows if he'll do it. Again, this is also Rodgers right now saying all the right things. He could also be putting on a good boy attitude because he wants to, make it kind of seem like, he's not the bad guy. He's saying all the right things right now. And then in the offseason, if he does go to another team, then it doesn't make him seem like he's the bad guy. So he's saying all the right things. He's kind of taking everything off his plate about, I'm going to take time. Maybe they'll release me, whatever. He's basically putting it all in the Jets' hands, whatever they want to do, because he's open to everything right now. So take this as you will. This is also another thing I would brought up, because if you would to bring Rodgers back next year, there's a good chance that a rookie quarterback is going to be sitting behind him. And Rodgers is kind of your 2025 bridge guy. Here was Rodgers on the idea of potentially mentoring another rookie quarterback. Now, he, of course, mentored Jordan Love in Green Bay, which at first he wasn't open to, then ended up working out really well. The two had a good relationship. We saw that in the documentary, which I still have to watch, but I saw the clip on that about Love and Rodgers. So here was Rodgers on the idea of coming into 2025, if he is back, mentoring a young quarterback for the future as the bridge.
Jets came to you and said after the season at some point, we'd love to have you back. We're going to draft a kid pretty high, and we're going to get him in at some point during the season.
During the season?
Yeah, or, if we fill out a contention,
Oh, that's a lot of negatives there, Rich.
Well, I'm thinking of the Cousins situation with
Yeah.
we want you back, but if we fall out of contention, we're going to go with the kid.
Totally. I mean, but there's more to that. I mean, number one, Atlanta's not out of contention, so a lot of the play is about performance. So, I think all of us, whether we got a guy behind us itching to play or not, there's, when they drafted Jordan, I felt like I was one bad stretch from being benched, and I, won MVP a couple years. So that's the way the league is. You got to prove it. You can play every single week and through stretches. So if they asked me back and they drafted a guy, I'd mentor the hell out of him if I was playing, and I'd try and play as well as I could to keep him on the bench.
So there's Rodgers, play as well as he could, mentor the hell out of him. We'll see. I don't know. There's not much more I think we need to say on the whole Rodgers thing. At this point, it kind of feels like we're just saying the same thing over and over again. It's going to come down to the general manager and the head coach. What do they want? You can't get into a situation where Woody Johnson is forcing Rodgers on the next GM and the next head coach, or vice versa, where Rodgers is like, I want to be here. I want to be the guy. Woody's like, okay, what do you want? And then they hire somebody that Rodgers wants, and then you really set yourself back. They need to make an unbiased hire the best people to make the football decisions, and the people that you hire, the general manager and the head coach, those two guys are, your guys that make the decisions. What to do with Aaron Rodgers. That'll be the first thing that comes across the desk of Mike Vrabel, of whoever the heck it is. John Robinson, Thomas Dimitroff, Ray Agnew, John Dorsey, whoever the heck they hire. Louis Riddick. First order of business will be figuring out what the plan is for Rodgers, and then you move from there. So that's what it comes down to. So that'll do it for another episode of In the Trenches with Gang Green. Appreciate you all so much for tuning in. Comment down below. What are your thoughts on the latest general manager and head coach reports? Your thoughts on the Garrett Wilson trade request rumor, and also some of Aaron Rodgers' comments. We'll have a lot more content coming your way the rest of the week. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem like we will be able to get a guest on for the Rams this week. Just some scheduling, just never ended up panning out with some scheduling stuff. So looks like we'll have to wait. Next week we will have a guy on for the Bills, and we'll also have another guy on for the Dolphins to close out the season. So apologize for that, but we will have our typical game preview up on Saturday, and I do plan on getting an episode up before then as well on any other news that comes out, maybe some more. I do have an episode I planned, depending on which week it's going to fall. I have an episode on some candidates that I would avoid if I'm the New York Jets. So we've talked a lot about guys that we like, a lot of guys that have been interviewed already. Also want to go down the road of some guys that I would not be open to bringing in as head coach. So just figuring out which time to do that. Want to kind of do that on a week where there's not a whole lot of news, like this week where we've had the interviews, obviously at our day after podcast, got another report today. So lots of stuff. I'm looking forward. I'll be honest. During the season, I'll say this, like mid-November, I was miserable with the Jets. I still am, but in terms of, like, I wasn't even looking forward to anything. Now I'm just looking forward to this. Like, I really am looking forward to a new GM, new head coach. And like mid-November, I was so down on this team. I was like, this is just terrible. I can't even get excited for a new GM, new head coach. But where we are right now that we've only got 3 games left of this garbage, it's at least going to be refreshing to finally hear a new voice, finally hear, new voices from the general manager, head coach, finally talk about new names, not regurgitate the same garbage that we've been talking about, or the same garbage decision-making and performances that we've been talking about with this team and this coaching staff and this front office. We can finally get into a new front office, new coaching staff. And I am kind of looking forward to the refreshment of it, especially just from a podcast perspective, like a content perspective. We can finally talk about new people making the decisions, because it's crazy. Like, Joe Douglas has been here prior to him firing since 2019. Saleh was here since 2021. I mean, they were both, you can make the case, a year or two overdue on their dismissals. So 2025 hopefully is just a refreshing time. We'll see. It'll ultimately come down to who they hire, though. Like, if they hire a guy that nobody likes, or nobody likes to hire right away, it's gonna be ugly. So stay tuned. We'll have a lot more content coming your way. Appreciate you all so much as always. Until next time, JETS, Jets.